Chapter 4 of To Let. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Simon Evers. The Forsyte Saga 3. To Let by John Galsworthy. Part 1, Chapter 4. The Mausoleum. There are houses whose souls have passed into the limbo of time, leaving their bodies in the limbo of London. Such was not quite the condition of Timothy's on the Bayswater Road, for Timothy's soul still had one foot in Timothy Forsyte's body, and Smither kept the atmosphere unchanging, of camphor and port wine, and house whose windows are only open to air it twice a day. To Forsyte imagination, that house was now a sort of Chinese pill-box, a series of layers in the last of which was Timothy. One did not reach him, or so it was reported by members of the family, who, out of old-time habit or absent-mindedness, would drive up once in a blue moon and ask after their surviving uncle. Such were Francie, now quite emancipated from God. She frankly avowed atheism. Euphemia, emancipated from old Nicholas, and Winifred Dartie from her Man of the World. But after all, everybody was emancipated now, or said they were, perhaps not quite the same thing. When Soames, therefore, took it on his way to Paddington Station on the morning after that encounter, it was hardly with the expectation of seeing Timothy in the flesh. His heart made a faint demonstration within him while he stood in full south sunlight on the newly whitened doorstep of that little house where 4 Forsytes had once lived, and now but one dwelt on, like a winter fly. The house into which Soames had come, and out of which he had gone, time without number, divested of, or burdened with, fardels of family gossip, the house of the old people of another century, another age. The sight of Smither, still corseted up to the armpits, because the new fashion which came in as they were going out about 1903 had never been considered nice by Aunts Julie and Hester, brought a pale friendliness to Soames's lips. Smither, still faithfully arranged to old pattern in every detail, an invaluable servant, none such left, smiling back at him with the words, "Why, it's Mr. Soames after all this time. And how are you, sir? Mr. Timothy will be so pleased to know you've been." "How is he?" "Oh, he keeps fairly bobbish for his age, sir. But of course he's a wonderful man. As I said to Mrs. Dartie when she was here last, it would please Miss Forsyte and Mrs. Julie and Miss Hester to see how he relishes a baked apple still. But he's quite deaf, and a mercy, I always think. For what we should have done with him in the air raids, I don't know." "Ah," said Soames, "what did you do with him?" "We just left him in his bed, and had the bell run down into the cellar, so that cook and I could hear him if he rang. It would never have done to let him know there was a war on. As I said to cook, if Mr. Timothy rings, they may do what they like. I'm going up. My dear mistresses would have a fit if they could see him ringing and nobody going to him. But he slept through them all beautiful. And the one in the daytime, he was having his bath. It was a mercy, because he might have noticed the people in the street all looking up. He often looks out of the window." "Quite," murmured Soames. Smither was getting garrulous. "I just want to look round and see if there's anything to be done." "Yes, sir. I don't think there's anything except a smell of mice in the dining-room that we don't know how to get rid of. It's funny they should be there, and not a crumb, since Mr. Timothy took to not coming down, just before the war. But they're nasty little things. You never know where they'll take you next." "Does he leave his bed?" "Oh, yes, sir. He takes nice exercise between his bed and the window in the morning, not to risk a change of air. And he's quite comfortable in himself. Has his will out every day regular. It's a great consolation to him, that." "Well, Smither, I want to see him if I can, in case he has anything to say to me." Smither coloured up above her corsets. "It will be an occasion," she said. "Shall I take you round the house, sir, when I send cook to break it to him?" "No, you go to him," said Soames. "I can go round the house by myself." One could not confess to sentiment before another, and Soames felt that he was going to be sentimental nosing round those rooms so saturated with the past. When Smither, creaking with excitement, had left him, Soames entered the dining-room and sniffed. In his opinion it wasn't mice, but incipient wood-rot, and he examined the panelling. Whether it was worth a coat of paint at Timothy's age, he was not sure. The room had always been the most modern in the house, and only a faint smile curled Soames's lips and nostrils. Walls of a rich green surmounted the oak dado. A heavy metal chandelier hung by a chain from a ceiling divided by imitation beams. The pictures had been bought by Timothy, a bargain, one day at Jobson's, 60 years ago. 3 Snyder still lifes, 2 faintly coloured drawings of a boy and a girl, rather charming, which bore the initials J.R. Timothy had always believed they might turn out to be Joshua Reynolds, but Soames, who admired them, had discovered that they were only John Robinson, and a doubtful moorland of a white pony being shod. Deep red plushed curtains, 10 high-backed dark mahogany chairs with deep red plush seats, a Turkey carpet, and a mahogany dining table as large as the room was small. Such was an apartment which Soames could remember unchanged in soul or body since he was 4 years old. He looked especially at the 2 drawings and thought, I shall buy those at the sale. From the dining-room he passed into Timothy's study. He did not remember ever having been into that room. It was lined from floor to ceiling with volumes, and he looked at them with curiosity. One wall seemed devoted to educational books, which Timothy's firm had published to 2 generations back, sometimes as many as 20 copies of one book. Soames read their titles and shuddered. The middle wall had precisely the same books as used to be in the library at his own father's in Park Lane, from which he deduced the fancy that James and his youngest brother had gone out together one day and bought a brace of small libraries. The third wall he approached with more excitement. Here surely Timothy's own taste would be found. It was. The books were dummies. The fourth wall was all heavily curtained window, and turned toward it was a large chair with a mahogany reading-stand attached, on which a yellowish and folded copy of The Times, dated July the 6th, 1914, the day Timothy first failed to come down, as if in preparation for the war. It seemed waiting for him still. In a corner stood a large globe of that world never visited by Timothy, deeply convinced of the unreality of anything but England, and permanently upset by the sea, on which he had been very sick one Sunday afternoon in 1836, out of a pleasure boat off the pier at Brighton, with Julie and Hester, Swithin and Hattie Chessman, all due to Swithin, who was always taking things into his head, and who, thank goodness, had been sick too. Soames knew all about it, having heard the tale 50 times at least from one or other of them. He went up to the globe and gave it a spin. It emitted a faint creak, and moved about an inch, bringing into his purview a daddy-long-legs which had died on it in latitude 44. Mausoleum, he thought. George was right. And he went out and up the stairs. On the half landing he stopped before the case of stuffed humming-birds which had delighted his childhood. They looked not a day older, suspended on wires above pampas grass. If the case were opened, the words would not begin to hum, but the whole thing would crumble, he suspected. It wouldn't be worth putting that into the sale. And suddenly he was caught by a memory of Aunt Anne, dear old Aunt Anne, holding him by the hand in front of that case and saying, "Look, Sammy, aren't they bright and pretty, dear little humming-birds?" Soames remembered his own answer. "They don't hum, Auntie." He must have been 6, in a black velveteen suit with a light blue collar. He remembered that suit well. Aunt Anne, with her ringlets and her spidery kind hands, and her grave old aquiline smile. A fine old lady, Aunt Anne. He moved on up to the drawing-room door. There, on each side of it, were the groups of miniatures. Those he would certainly buy in. The miniatures of his 4 aunts, one of his Uncle Swithin, adolescent, and one of his Uncle Nicholas as a boy.